What if Deku was Minatos Reincarnation? This is a compilation of all of the episodes that went into making this series, so if you go on to enjoy the video, consider leaving a like, seeing as it only takes 1 second and it helps the video do a ton better in the YouTube algorithm. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
So the way that we start this what if off is going to be a little bit of a different way. Now Deku normally just gets to live a normal happy life and just gets to be OP in his school and gets a different friendships type with Bakugo, considering that he still goes there. This time around I figured that I would change things up a bit, considering that Minato in the Naruto storyline was an orphan, so I figured, hey, you know what? Let's do that. So now we're going to be starting off our story in a different spot. Inko pretty much is in a hoodie, right? She's in an all black outfit and Hisashi's waiting for her in the car, right? Like they're really young and they don't want to have a kid. So, she had Izuku, and once he was born, she just put him on the doorstep. Izuku went on to pretty much be taken in by the orphanage, and after this he was pretty much there for years and years to come. Nothing would really change about his situation until eventually he would get to the age of 4 years old. Once he could finally understand things, he could read books, and he could kind of get a broader picture of how the world works, if that makes sense. Once he gets to this point, he would begin having a bunch of lucid dreams where he could kind of almost feel like he is looking through things from his own perspective, and he's doing crazy things that are just insane. It looks almost identical to him, but like strange, almost as if he's from a different world. It's interesting to Deku because he never quite understood it, but it just feels like it's him. But regardless though, he pretty much looks like a My Hero Academia version of Minato, and a young one at that, right? To the point where Izuku would kind of just continue having these dreams and would write these things down every time that he would see. He would note how strange it was that that person would always weave these sort of strange fast-paced hand signs and would sort of concentrate and would be able to see so many different abilities, such as fire being shot out of the mouth and earth coming from nowhere, water creating floods that are just insane, like water coming in out of nowhere. And Izuku is just baffled. Like Izuku is just impressed to no ends. Like Izuku thinks that this is awesome, right? And what he would do is essentially, once he gets to the age of like, let's say 6, like 5-ish, right? We could do 5 or 6, but I think I'm gonna go with 5. Let's say once he gets to the age of 5, he starts trying to learn about what his quirk is, right? And he would be told that his quirk is something called chakra, or life energy, and that it can use that to use strange abilities. And Deku would use this to pretty much start learning the ninja basics. He would remember back to those strange dreams that he had about Minato when he was in the academy, and he would use those same lessons to teach himself how to do different things. Instead of having real kunais, he would have to make fake ones out of paper with origami tools and stuff like that, and he would pretty much practice by using those things. Once he gets to the age of 7, one day he would be at the age of 7, and at this point he would know the very fundamentals of what it takes to be a ninja, not really having learned any jutsus yet, but getting around to the point where he wants to learn about wall walking and water walking and tree walking, right? And so one day, a pro hero would actually walk into the orphanage, and it would be an older man, right? But the pro hero would walk into the orphanage, and he would actually watch as Deku would pretty much be training, right? Deku was trying to run up the wall, and the interesting thing would be that the kid is sticky. He's sticking to the wall like Spider-Man. The man would find that it very much so interesting, and he would be extremely impressed with Deku. As it would be at this point that the man would walk over towards Deku, and they would begin to initiate a conversation where he would ask him what he was doing over there. And Izuku says that he's trying to train his quirk, that he thinks if he's able to work hard enough, he would be able to walk on walls or maybe even waters, considering if he masters his quirk, he could do many abilities. And the man would think to himself that this kid is special. He's a retired pro hero, and since his wife died, he's needed some company. So what does he do? He continues talking to Izuku, and he would realize that he actually really likes Izuku's vibe. He just likes everything about Izuku. He thinks to himself that the kid is cool. the kid's all right. And so from here, what would actually end up happening is that Izuku would go on to pretty much, Izuku would go on to pretty much be adopted by this guy, and he would just end up taking him back home, where Izuku would end up having to live in a new place. And he works with this man whose name is going to be Sajima for the following rest of the story, right? And what would end up pretty much happening is that they would go on to bond. Like, Izuku would finally have some sort of father, grandfather-like figure in his life who would be there to teach him right from wrong, who would be there for him whenever he falls or slips, whenever he fails, always encouraging him, and knowing that someday Izuku was going to be great. Someday Izuku was going to be a pro hero. Sajima would always talk about it, and always does, right? And Izuku just continues training, learning the basics of taijutsus, beginning to actually learn how to use real shurikens and also kunais, considering that Sajima would be able to provide that stuff for Deku. Now, eventually Deku would actually be interested in swords. So he would, actually ask to have some swords and stuff like that, right? And, that would be very interesting because Sajima would wonder to himself, hey, like, should I actually give this kid a sword? Like, isn't that kind of dangerous? You know what I mean? Like, it is, but still. And he would just be thinking to himself, it's kind of dangerous. I'm not sure about this one, but he does it anyways. And Izuku would go on to train with swords, and he would just begin to learn so many brand new taijutsu-like techniques that Minato would have had during his early age and years. Eventually, we would get to the point where Izuku would turn 14 years old, and a huge time skip would happen, right? And at this point, Izuku would finally be getting ready to get into UA and take his entrance exam and things like that. Izuku would get dropped off by Sajima, who would then make his way back home, seeing as Izuku was just going to be taking the bus back home. And once this happens, Izuku would make his way towards the front of UA, where he would end up noticing a girl with brown hair. He thinks she's really pretty, but he would continue to walk by, considering he's not going to slip and fall. And from here, he makes his way to the podium, where he would pretty much end up sitting down and end up pretty much taking the test. Ida, still like a little brainiac, would end up calling out Present Mike, to which Present Mike is like, yo kid, if you would only listen to me, you realize that I was gonna get to that point. And Ida just sits down, and this time he doesn't be like, oh, you over there, be quiet, right? But regardless, eventually Izuku finds his way outside. And once he's there, Izuku would end up not actually seeing a rock at the front of the line. Instead, he sees this really rowdy, angry girl going towards the top of the front, where she's like, get out of my way, right? And, she's like, get out of the way, extras. And Izuku would be like, what? Like, that's interesting, right? He's looking at her, and, she looks at him for a split moment before turning back to the front and making her way towards the front. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to drop a big, massive bomb on you. Katsuki Bakugo is going to be gender bended in this version, and his name is going to be, drumroll please, Katsumi. We're going to be going with the name Katsumi for this what if specific. Now, her name is going to be Katsumi, and pretty much we're just going to be saying that Bakugo, instead of being born a boy, he's just born a girl. He's still, he's actually going to be a lot different, considering that he's now a girl, and he's going to have a lot of different likes and dislikes, but she wants to prove that she can become a pro hero and that a girl can actually be the #1 hero, right? That's her goal. And Izuku, he's pretty cool. And because, she's still raised in the same household, she has that same fiery personality as her mother. And some of you guys might be like, okay, but why would you gender bend? Like, what's up with that, Xehther? Like, you're weird. Like, you're so weird. Who does that? Think about it. I mean, nobody else in the My Hero Academia storyline really has that same temperament that Kushina has. And I think that by doing this, we could kind of give a little polar opposite of what, Kushina was. Or no, not polar opposite, but kind of something similar to what Kushina is in the Naruto storyline, where she can be kind, but she also has that fiery temper, right? And so I thought that that would be something cool to add to the story. But regardless, eventually the test would start. And as soon as it does, Izuku would just rush towards the front of everybody, right? And as the crowd is just overwhelming the entrance, Izuku just walks over the wall gate, right? And he jumps over, and immediately he would jump over from building to building, running on top of them, doing some sort of strange parkour, getting ahead of everybody to where most of the robots are at, right? And immediately Izuku, using his pouch that he was allowed to use for this exam, would throw out a bunch of kunais, right? Now those kunais would go flying towards the direction of those robots, and the robots would have to pretty much like try to attack Izuku, but it would be pretty much pointless because Izuku would just begin teleporting around like boom, 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 boom. Like, just imagine Minato going around and just trying to destroy robots with a kunai. kunai. Like Izuku teleports in, grabs the kunai, slash, 3 points. Grabs another kunai, slash, 1 point. Another kunai, 2 points, 3 points, 1 point. You get the drill, right? And that's pretty much what would end up happening because he doesn't have the Rasengan quite yet. He hasn't learned that. That's a very difficult jutsu to learn. And so is the Flying Raijin, but Izuku studied that the most. Like that was the coolest thing that he wanted. And that's why he ends up getting it at the early age of 14. But regardless, Izuku being at this age wouldn't be able to spam it for too long because his chakra pool isn't that massive, but he does have enough and he has mastered it to the point where he can use it with low chakra consumption, or at least relatively low, right? But Izuku just continues to go in there and just bam, 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 like completely destroying the robots. And it's actually really, really cool to look at because you just see Izuku there and now he's over here, and he's just cutting these robots up left and right. And everybody who would be watching this, aka the heroes who would be like, oh, okay, like that kid has potential, they would just be thinking that kid has so much potential, like it's insane. And Izuku's just destroying robots and he's just showing off his natural talents to the point where eventually he would get to the point where he shoots a wind style jutsu right at one of the robots, a one pointer, and he would blow it back to the ground before jumping up and grabbing 2 kunais and just coming down and slashing the robot, right? The robot would then go on to explode and Izuku would create a mud wall jutsu to stop the impact. And they would begin to notice how Izuku looks like he has multiple quirks. It's insane. And All Might would just be thinking to himself, oh, for one, is this your doing? He begins getting angry. But as he watches the kid fight, he doesn't fight the way that All For One does, and it doesn't look like he's influenced by evil. But All Might definitely wants to talk to this kid, considering it seems like he has multiple quirks. Regardless though, eventually Izuku, after destroying more and more robots, finally a loud rumbling would be heard on the ground, right? And it would be like just everybody starts running away, and it would be at this moment that Izuku turns to that direction and notices, what's that? He looks up and he sees just this gigantic 0-point monster thing, right? And it would be at this point that Izuku notices that there's this girl that was actually trapped under some rubble. It would be like this dirty blonde girl, right? And Izuku realizes it was that girl at the front. So in a split second, as everybody's running away, Izuku throws a kunai as hard as he can and would catch it. And he grabs onto Katsumi, grabs her by the arm, and then teleports away as the 0-pointer was just about to stomp on them. But Izuku was capable of saving her just in the nick of time before the pro heroes that were on standby were going to actually have to do something. And Katsumi, she would think to herself, how did you do that? As Izuku explains, teleportation quirk. And she says, but I saw you shoot fire from your mouth. How many quirks do you have? Izuku would be like, it's all part of one quirk. It allows me to do a bunch of different things. It's a very, very interesting quirk. It's life energy. And she would think, well, if I have life energy too, right? I'm alive. And Izuku would say, no, it's nothing like that. But from here, he would look around as there's actually 30 seconds left. And Izuku thinks to himself, I got to get more points. As he throws, teleports to another kunai that was near a not the 0-pointer, but another robot, and would proceed to get about 5 more points right as the test would end. And at the end of it, Izuku would end up getting a grand total of 300 points because of the fact that he destroyed like 100 something robots, right? And he also ended up getting 50 points from rescuing Katsumi from her horrific death that was most likely going to happen, right? And from here, Izuku is just smiling. Like he thinks that he did a good thing today. Like he finally showed what it was like to be a hero without being a real hero, right? He didn't need a license to know that he was going to save people, that he was going to jump in whenever he was needed, that he was going to do the right thing every single time. Izuku doesn't need some hero status to do that because that's just who he is. Izuku is just a great person, a great hero. And from here, Izuku grabs his stuff, grabs his bag and puts all of his tools away, makes his way towards the bus station where, it would be like dim light. He gets in and finally he makes his way home. As Izuku's on his way home, the train would begin shaking and, Izuku would realize that something's up, right? This is when he goes towards the back as he notices that this guy is actually currently getting mugged in the back of the train, right? And Izuku going over there, he would think to himself that it might be illegal to use his powers, but it's the right thing to do. And so from here, Izuku proceeds to essentially just rush in there and be like, hey, stop. As the guy would be like, get out of here, kid, before you get hurt. And Izuku would just think to himself, yeah, I definitely need to show him I'm serious. So from here, he throws his kunai and he would catch it as he places the kunai straight to the neck of the guy. And he would say, I said, stop. As from here, the criminal looks back to Izuku with a shiver in his body, and Izuku would tell him, sit down right next to me or I'll kill you. And from here, the man would just immediately like calm down, sit down, and the other guy who was actually getting mugged would be like, thank you, under his breath, right? As Izuku would sit right next to this guy, and the dude would be terrified because like Izuku is 14 years old, but he just said that with no mercy, no care, almost as if he has killed before. And he never heard something like that from anybody, no gang members, no thugs, no villains. Izuku seemed like he was dead serious about truly like taking his life away from him in an instant. And that was truly terrifying to that man. But regardless, they would make their way towards their stops, and finally Izuku would make his way home. He enters the house with his house keys, and once he does, he would notice that Sajima's on the ground. Izuku's like, Sajima, stop playing, get up. And he would not get up until Izuku would go over and be like, Sajima, get up, get up. He begins trying to shake him and be like, no, come on, wake up, you got this. You're gonna wake up, you're just kidding, right? Sajima, please get up. As he realizes that he's not getting up, so he immediately grabs onto the body and just teleports around to the location of UA High School where he knows that Recovery Girl is at, right? She kisses Sajima, and from here he would slightly regain consciousness and begin getting healed like a little bit, right? As he looks towards the direction of Deku and he's like, you made it, kid. And Izuku's like, what happened? And Sajima's like, I'm getting old. It's harder for me to be around now. I think I lived a good life, kid. It's about time that you move on. I already wrote a will. You're gonna be keeping everything. Just promise me something, kid. As it starts to low-key start flatlining, and he's like, he's coughing, and he says, you'll become a great hero someday, kid. Become number one. As he just flatlines, and Izuku just has to watch as Sajima's arm just falls, and Izuku holds onto it as he screams out, Sajima! You know what I mean? And from here, Recovery Girl just looks at him, she nods her head no, and Izuku just, he begins bawling out like never before, because that was like the only person in his life that Izuku, as of this moment, truly cared about. And Izuku would finally feel what it's like to lose somebody. And Izuku would think to himself that he never wants to feel that feeling again, right? And so what would end up happening after this is Izuku has to pretty much go home and like for the next couple of days until he gets his acceptance letter, just be sitting there in this big house all by himself, just like alone. He has nothing to do but train, and that's all he does. For the next couple of days, he continues working on that jutsu, and Izuku's saddened, you know what I mean? Like, he's not the same after the death of Sajima. I mean, how could you? You just literally lost like your father figure. You'll never be the same after that, but it's something that Izuku has to learn to live with now, and he does. He has to learn to live with it. He has to learn to cope with these things. And, in my personal, experience, Izuku will be fine. But eventually, though, Izuku does get to the point where he gets his acceptance letter and is happy. And, he would say, thanks, Sajima, for always looking out for me. And from here, he begins getting smiley and happier because he knows that Sajima's watching over him from, you guys know where. And, Izuku just happy. He knows that he has to complete his goal of becoming the number one hero for Sajima because he promised him. And a promise is a promise. From here, Izuku would make his way towards UA the very next day as he cooks himself some breakfast and makes his way towards UA, right? Considering he would wake up a bit late, he just flying Raijins in there. And once at the gates of UA, Izuku would just smile to himself as he thinks, finally here. Today, Sajima, is the start of making you proud. As he would say, hopefully you're watching me. And Sajima up in heaven would just be smiling as he thinks to himself that, go get him, kid. As Izuku walks into the classroom, sits down, and realizes that there's some sort of sleeping bag there. Izuku from here senses the energy signature of Aizawa and would think to himself, most likely our teacher. He sits down, and from here the grumpy girl would be in the front fighting with some blue-haired boy who would be telling her to get the legs off of that desk, that it is UA property and that she cannot disrespect this by putting her feet up on top of the desk. Izuku would smirk to himself as he watches Katsumi argue with Ida, and she pretty much ends up finally putting her legs down once Aizawa gets up and announces, alright, settle down. He finally ends up calling them all outside, and it would be at this point that Izuku would make his way towards the changing room where he finally begins to, change. You know, it's changing for a reason. But anyways, he starts changing, right? And everybody watching would be like, yo, dude, you're ripped, because Izuku actually has a very, very toned body. And, you know, Izuku would think, thanks, you know, I've worked hard for a couple of years. And from here, you know, he finally makes his way outside to the point where Aizawa would end up throwing the ball as far as he can and saying, look, this is my score. Today you're going to be tested on your quirks and seeing if you will be allowed to stay in UA. And from here, Araka's like, but what about orientation? And Aizawa says, I can run my classroom however I want. I don't believe you need orientation. We have 3 years to get you guys prepared for the real world, and I'm not planning on wasting any of those years. As from here, Aizawa looks to the direction of Izuku and says, here, kid, throw that as far as you can. And Izuku says, and I can use any means necessary, am I right? And Aizawa would be like, as long as you stay within the circle. And from here, Izuku just thinks to himself, all right, stay inside the circle. Shouldn't be too hard. As from here, Izuku would begin to pretty much just charge strength in his arm with chakra, something that's not, you know, something that Sakura does where she charges up her fist to be able to be super strong, right? And Izuku just does that to his arm, tossing it very, very much so far until Aizawa shows it off to the class and says, 500 meters. And from here, everybody would be like, 500? Wow, this sounds like fun. We really get to let loose at UA. This is awesome. But Aizawa just looks back to the people and he's like, fun? Awesome? I'll show you guys fun. Whoever comes in last place is expelled. Time skip. All right, so what happens between part 1 and part 2, and how big is the time skip that I'm alluding to right now? Well, the time skip would be about 30 minutes. Basically when the test would end. Now, when this all happens, Izuku would end up being the one that ends up getting first place, followed by Momo, who comes in second, Todoroki third, and Katsumi Bakugo fourth. Now, once she comes forth, he would notice something about her, that she does not like losing whatsoever. Like, she doesn't like it at all. At all. Like, she looks very, very much so angry. And Izuku's like, sheesh, like, she's pretty mad, right? And so everybody else would kind of begin making fun of her for that temper, especially the girls. And she would turn to them and be like, hey, I'll kill ya. And from here, you know, the girls would obviously like get scared off, but Aizawa would be like, hey, calm down, girl. You know, as Izuku watches, chuckles, and looks right at her, you know, like he's looking at her, but he's not looking at her with anger or nothing bad. Like, he's looking at her with a smile, and she looks at him and notices, and she just catches Izuku staring, and she's like, what are you looking at? Is there something on my face or something? And Izuku's like, no, sorry. From here, he looks away, and then bro just straight goes home. He would get home, relax, and then realize, oh, Sajima's not here. You know, he got home waiting to tell Sajima about that strange girl, but he remembers he really can't. And so what does Izuku do? He goes outside, trains, gets stronger, and works on some sort of special jutsu called the Rasengan. Something that he's actually been working on for quite some time now, and that he has almost figured out. It's been about 3 years since he's begun working on this. But the next day at school, he would get paired up with Katsumi Bakugo for the Heroes versus Villains trials, and they would actually have to face off against Todoroki and Momo, who are both going to be guarding the bomb, and that is going to be pretty interesting. You know, we got couple versus couple, or at least future couple versus future couple, right? And the way that I see this all playing down is essentially Katsumi going over to Izuku and being like, okay, what do we do? And, you know, Izuku just being like, all right, so I think that the best course of action would be, you know, he says his idea and she's like, that's dumb. Why don't we just go in there guns blazing? And Izuku says, I don't know if you noticed, but that one guy has an ice quirk. He'll probably freeze the building by the time that we get in it. So I think we stay out of it until the building is frozen. And Katsumi's like, yeah, whatever. As from here, Izuku's like, trust me, like if my plan doesn't work, we'll go guns blazing. And Katsumi, she's like, all right, fine. And, you know, immediately, you know, All Might would be like, begin, right? And from here, you know, they would both look at each other and then they're like, okay, let's do it, right? As Izuku just looks towards the direction of Katsumi and they just stand there. They literally just stand outside of the building. And Todoroki just has his eyes closed. He finally opens them, right? And, you know, a shadow clone of Izuku's would have ended up making it towards the direction of the bomb room. As Katsumi's like, wait, what? Weren't you just, as you know, she realizes that another Izuku ran off into the building and went upstairs, right? And she's like, but I thought you, and Izuku just says, shh, and she does, right? She stays quiet until suddenly the whole entire area would get frozen, right? And, Todoroki would think to himself that he finally did it. But from here, Izuku grabs onto Katsumi and he would proceed to wall walk as he and her make their way towards the direction of the bomb room that Todoroki's in. And Izuku would pretty much begin using a genjutsu, was very, very subtle genjutsu, right? To cast it on Todoroki to make him think that, okay, he came in through the front door, as he shoots an icicle beam right over there. And Izuku then nods at Katsumi. He would blast off at Todoroki and be like, die, right? As Izuku lunges towards Momo's direction and throws a kunai right at her, which would actually end up cutting her right on the side of the stomach. And Izuku would grab it as he appears right behind Momo and he would say to her, give up. As Momo would pretty much just immediately surrender, feeling the kunai to her neck, as All Might would be shocked at how incredibly fast Izuku is, right? From here, Izuku just goes on to look at Todoroki, who had finally broken out of the genjutsu, and he would look towards the direction of the bomb as he pretty much covers it in ice so that they can't even touch it even if they wanted to, right? From here, Izuku was forced to jump back as Todoroki would shoot a beam of ice at him, and Izuku would actually be forced to create a fire style jutsu to try to melt the ice, right? And the ice would begin melting, of course, but still it would be a lot harder to melt ice than it is for fire and water to come at each other, because a fire doesn't exactly melt ice that fast, you know what I mean? But it does definitely work well. And Todoroki would be shocked, like, he has a fire quirk, right? He's like, how many quirks does this guy have? Suddenly Izuku would say, all right, let's see what happens if I do this. As from here, he shoots a wind style jutsu right at Todoroki as he would throw a kunai while Todoroki wasn't looking, and the kunai would actually end up going towards the bomb, as Izuku from here would land behind the bomb and cast a fire style jutsu that would melt through the ice just enough for Izuku to poke his hand into it, grab the bomb, and All Might to say, we have a winner, right? He announces that they won, and from here Todoroki would be like, whatever. As from here, he gets down and Momo and Todoroki would be announced the losers, as Katsumi would look at Izuku and bump him and be like, hey, you're all right. And, from here, Izuku's like, yeah, you're fine too, Katsumi. As she would walk off and, she kind of has a little bit of a slight blush on her face, but Izuku wouldn't notice it. And from here, he would make his way towards the rest of his classmates. Now, it's at this moment that all of them would begin to pretty much start hyping him up as the strongest, considering that he just beat Todoroki, who they thought might have actually been the strongest, regardless of the standings of the Quirk apprehension test. And from here, Invisible Girl comes up to Izuku and taps him, and Izuku's like, whoa, what was that? And she's like, sorry, it was me. And Izuku's like, oh, right, sorry, I forgot that we had somebody with such a unique quirk. And she blushes and she's like, yeah, it is unique. And Izuku's like, it's awesome, can you turn it off and on? And Invisible Girl's like, no, I'm stuck invisible. And Izuku's like, oh man, well, it's still good because at least you always get to use your quirk. And she's like, I guess. And from here, everybody just begins talking as the rest of the Quirk apprehension stuff goes on. And eventually, 2 days later, Aizawa tells them, hey, get these permission slips signed, kids. You guys need them to go to the USJ. And everybody's like, we're going to the Universal Studios Japan? And then he's like, no, we're going to, unforeseen simulation joint. And you guys are about to, see what it's like to face off against natural disasters. And they're all like, cool, right? Like from here, they all go get their paper signed. And Izuku would just be thinking to himself, who signs my paper? Like, Sajima's dead. And from here, he walks over to Aizawa as he asks him what he does, because he doesn't have a father figure in his life. He was an orphan, and the person who had taken care of him since he was 7 years old, or 6 or 5, I think. No, 7, right? Yeah, 7. Would pretty much be dead now, right? So Aizawa just says, look, go talk to the principal about that. I'm really not sure. This has never happened before. And from here, Izuku's like, all right, thanks, Aizawa. As he makes his way towards Principal Nezu's office, and Nezu would be like, Izuku, what can I do for you? He's like, would you like some tea? And Izuku's like, yeah, please. And from here, Nezu goes on to pretty much talk to Izuku for a bit, right? Now, it would be at this point that Izuku would begin talking to Nezu, right? And Nezu would be like, well, that is definitely an interesting dilemma. No parent figure means that you can't really go under normal circumstances. But seeing as you're an orphan, I think that it's fair if I was to sign this, considering how powerful you are. I think you'll be fine. From here, he signs the paper for Izuku, and suddenly somebody would enter the classroom in all of their 8 feet to 7 feet glory, right? All Might busts in, and he's like, Izuku, we need to talk. As from here, Nezu would say, All Might, you finally ready to talk to the boy about your little issues, right? And Nezu would begin to hop off of his high chair and he's like, all right, I'll give you guys the room. As from here, All Might begins to walk over towards Izuku, sit him down and pretty much pass him something to drink. And he then tells the kid, are you working with All for One? As Izuku's like, all for who? And All Might's like, don't lie to me, kid. You know who he is. How else could you have gotten access to so many quirks? You have the ability to shoot fire out of nowhere, wind, earth. You even have the ability to walk on walls. You can teleport all over the place. What is it with you, kid? How do you have so many powers? And Izuku would be like, look, first of all, these powers are all one singular quirk. My quirk is the ability of life energy. With life energy, I can transfer that energy into different things. That very same energy can be used to stick onto things if I channel it strong enough. That same energy can fortify my body. That same energy can manifest itself as things that I call jutsus. And the way that it works is that my body has chakra paths that allow me to use those things to actually create foreign techniques such as flames, lightning, wind, earth. And All Might would be like, lightning? And Izuku's like, yeah, I actually have that ability as well. All Might would be very, very impressed with Izuku's quirk. And then he would say, so just to be straight, you have no idea who All for One is, right? And Izuku says, look, All Might, if I knew who that was, I would tell you. I loved you ever since I was a kid. But, you never were my number one hero. It was always, and then he says the old name of Sajima's pro hero name. And All Might's like, what? Really? You liked him? I actually remember I saw him once or twice once I was a young up and coming hero, right? And, Izuku's like, really, All Might? Like, that's awesome. And All Might just nods and he's like, yeah, he was great. He was great back then. And from here, Izuku's like, he was actually my father figure. He adopted me when I was about 5 years old. 5 years old? No, 7 years old, right? And from here, All Might's like, that's great, kid. He's like, sorry for stunning you and making you a little terrified. And Izuku's like, oh, no, don't worry, All Might. I wasn't scared at all. And All Might's like, what? And Izuku's like, yeah, see you later, All Might. As he walks out of the door and All Might is just left there sitting there just like the kid wasn't even scared or nothing. Wasn't even a little intimidating. And from here, All Might's just thinking to himself, did I lose my edge, man? Like, am I getting soft or something? And, Izuku just proceeds to go home where he would continue to train. And from here would finally wait about a week. Finally, during this week, one thing would happen which would be kind of interesting, which would be that some strange kid with blonde hair would go over to Izuku and tap him. He's like, finally, I get to know how his quirk works, right? And Monoma realizes it's a blank slate. It's another one of those strange blank slates. I can't copy his quirk. And, from here, Izuku looks to the direction of Monoma. And, what's her name? Is it, that girl with the orange hair? I forgot her name. Kendall, right? Kendall. She walks up and she's like, hey, Monoma. She smacks him over the head. And Izuku's like, he's like, what was that about? And she's like, oh, don't mind him. He's one of us in class 1B. He's seen all about your power and we all have, and we think it's interesting. He has the ability to copy other quirks. I guess he was trying to copy yours. And Izuku's like, oh, right. He said something about blank slate. Monoma just gets up and he's like, yeah, I couldn't copy your quirk for some reason. It's interesting. I can only usually not copy some sorts of quirks. And from here, Katsumi, she's watching everything, eating. And Izuku grabs his tray of lunch and makes his way over towards Katsumi's table, where she's actually not sitting next to anybody. Because of the mere fact that, Kirishima doesn't have to actually think that she's cool, considering she's not manly, you know what I mean? And, Kaminari, I feel like Kaminari would want to be all over her, but considering how scary she is, I think he would stick to Jiro. So Katsumi is just kind of sitting by herself. And Izuku goes over, sits right next to her and says, is this spot taken? Katsumi, she's like, yeah, it's not, but you can't sit there. I like eating alone. And Izuku's like, nah, nonsense. Like, I'll sit here. And from here, he asks, he's like, what's your story? Why do you want to become a pro hero? And Katsumi, she says, I want to prove that I can become the number one hero, even if I'm a girl. All my life, people have said, oh, if you were a boy, you'd be so much stronger, so much better. But I don't think that's true. I think I'm fine the way that I am. And Izuku says, that's an honorable goal. My goal is becoming the number one hero for my deceased father. And Katsumi would think to herself, well, don't think for a second I'm going to let you win just because your dad died. And, she finally realizes what came out of her mouth. And she's like, sorry, it's a little competitive. And Izuku just like, nah, yeah, I get it. It's totally cool. Like, I understand, fiery nature. Love it. And, Katsumi looks at him and she's like, really? And Izuku's like, yeah, of course. I mean, you're competitive, right? It's great to be competitive. It's great to have that fiery spirit within us, It makes us who we are. And Katsumi thinks, yeah, that's right. And from here, Izuku would go on to continue talking to her for a bit until eventually, other people would end up pretty much leaving and the next class would start. From here, Izuku wouldn't really speak to Katsumi for a while until eventually the day of the USJ event would actually happen and Izuku would have no other seats open except for the one near Katsumi. It's at this point that he has to pretty much start talking to her, and Izuku uses his unforeseen chakra riz, to pretty much riz Katsumi up a little bit, make her laugh every now and then. And when she laughs, she would kind of like stop herself as, she looks around, notices other people are noticing she's laughing. And, Mineta would bump Izuku on the shoulder and be like, dude, I think she likes you. That's interesting. I thought you were the demon. And from here, Izuku's like, come on, don't call her that. And Katsumi hears that. She's like, hey. And from here, Mineta's like, see? And from here, they walk inside as Ida just leads them all inside. And once they're in there, 13 begins to give her lame speech as, she's like, quirks can be really dangerous if you guys don't know how to use them properly. And, everybody kind of gets what the point is of her little speech. But eventually what would end up happening is Izuku would end up making his way towards the front. And it would be here where Izuku would ask Aizawa, how many people are supposed to be in the USJ? And Aizawa's like, only us. Why? As Izuku would say, because there's, and suddenly Kurogiri would teleport in front of all of them as Bakugo would rush in, or Katsumi, sorry. She rushes in with her explosion quirk and goes right through him. Kirishima would try right next, and he would actually go right through him as well. As what would actually end up happening is Kurogiri would end up being like, sorry to barge your party, heroes. But it looks like we weren't invited. As from here, a bunch of villains would finally make their presence known. They come out of hiding and, Aizawa realizes, 13, get the students to safety. I'll handle this, as he jumps down and begins trying to face off against all the villains that are down there. And Katsumi and Kirishima would look at each other and then rush towards the direction of Kurogiri once more, as Kurogiri teleports a multitude of the class away, and Ida would break out of the USJ trying to alert All Might. As of this moment, Izuku would be teleported straight to the water area where he would land and walk on the water, jump back on the boat, and watch as Tsuyu would actually save Mineta from drowning. And from here, Izuku would actually end up making a plan to get them out of there. And the plan was throw a kunai, and then from here use some sort of vortex jutsu to just cause the villains to, get hit with the underwater tsunami, right? And what Izuku would do is throw a kunai straight back to land, teleport them all there, and then use a water style jutsu vortex whirlwind to pretty much just cause a gigantic vortex, what I just said, whirlwind, to happen in the water, which would suck up all the villains and have them actually collide with each other and make them all be ultimately defeated, as Mineta would throw a bunch of sticky bombs in there, right? As he's out of the water and he starts kicking it, saying, yeah, villain, do something, right? And from here, Izuku's like, not cool, dude. And Mineta's just like, sorry, got a little carried away. And from here, what would actually end up happening is Izuku would make his way towards Aizawa, where he would get back to back with him and begin using taijutsu skills to actually fight against these villains with hand-to-hand combat. And Aizawa would be extremely impressed with Izuku. I mean, when was the last time a kid used nothing but taijutsu and was actually able to defeat a multitude of villains without using their quirk? Izuku would bust that out eventually, and what he does end up using is a lightning style, which would actually cause all of the villains that were in his vicinity to get hit with this like cord, this like stream of electricity that would actually hit them and cause them to get disoriented, dazed, and all that stuff, right? And the villains would actually get caught off guard by this because it's like they never expected this kid to actually have the hands and be able to pull out lightning and stuff like that. But once that would happen and they would take care of a large group of villains, eventually Shigaraki would begin scratching his neck and be like, it's not fair. Kurogiri, bring out the Nomu. As from here, Kurogiri would pretty much use his quarter quirk and bring a Nomu out immediately, as, it would start causing havoc, right? It roars and, Shigaraki's like, Nomu, kill the brat. As the zero pointer, or I'm sorry, not the zero pointer, but the Nomu itself would look at the direction of Deku and it would rush him with a powerful like war cry, like screech, right? And Izuku would just think to himself, oh, that's not good. As the Nomu would rush in and throw a punch, which Izuku would dodge by teleporting away, right? The Nomu from here would turn back around towards the direction where Izuku teleported, and it would look at him as it roars out once more, and it would then rush at him again and again and again and again. And Izuku would try to do whatever he can and try to like slash at the Nomu, right? But when Izuku would teleport behind the Nomu and try to cut it, he would realize that the Nomu would actually not get pierced. Like its skin was so thick that, Izuku's kunai was just not piercing it. And Izuku would even channel chakra through it, but it didn't get deep enough to actually hurt the Nomu. The kunai would literally pop out of its skin and just heal right back up in some sort of Venom Wolverine-esque type way, right? Where Izuku would just get completely stunned, and then he would get punched away, as Izuku would really feel it in his forearms, considering that's what he blocks with. And Izuku from here would have the Nomu screeching as it rushes back towards him, and Izuku was forced to teleport right in the midst of the very, very last instant, right? As from here, Izuku would begin to pretty much try to get as much space from the Nomu as he can and trap it in an earth-style like coffin thing that the Nomu would just punch its way out of. And Aizawa would be shocked because he's actually using his like cancellation of Quirk ability, right? And Aizawa was just like, that thing is just so strong. And Izuku from here, he's just like, okay, how do I handle this? He's thinking to himself, what do I do, right? But from here, he would think to himself, that jutsu. If I can only land that jutsu at the top of its brain, I think that that's a weak point. If I can land it there, that might just be enough to do it. And so from here, Izuku would tell Aizawa, if you use your quirk in tandem with my ability that I've been working on, we might be able to defeat this thing. And so Aizawa says, fine, but make it quick. As from here, he activates his quirk erasure ability, and Izuku would pretty much lunge at the Nomu. As they're both going in to throw a punch, and Izuku would be coming in using his sword, right? Izuku drops his sword last minute, teleports over the Nomu, catches his kunai, and then slam! A Rasengan straight to the top of the brain of the Nomu. As the Nomu would screech out in so much pain, and Izuku would stab the Rasengan, piercing it through the head of the Nomu, causing it to just explode everywhere, and Izuku would land on the ground as the Nomu would finally be defeated. And Shigaraki says, no, Kurogiri, get us out of here. We pick up our story right after the events of the USJ. Now, eventually, Kurogiri and Shigaraki end up departing from the USJ, and once that happens, cleanup would start, and with cleanup happens a couple of different things. Now, cleanup leads to Izuku finding himself in the back of a police car. Now, in that said police car, Izuku just starts thinking to himself how powerful that Nomu creature was. And Izuku wonders, had he not had that jutsu, what would have happened? Considering that All Might was still about 1 minute late after that. So Deku thinks that he could have actually ended up finding his end to that Nomu. That thing was some beast, and that Izuku got so lucky being able to actually defeat it, considering that Aizawa was there stopping its regeneration from activating fast enough so that the Nomu could actually come back. Thinking to himself that had it not been for Aizawa, he probably would not have made it out of there without a couple more broken bones, right? And so from here, Izuku would simply just sit there, and the police comes up to him with a clipboard, and he's like, all right, kid, tell us about what you saw, how'd it go down? Izuku from here begins to break everything down and just pretty much imagine that I just told you the what if, but he told it to that guy, right? And from here, the guy's like, oh, well, that's crazy. As from here, he's like, I really haven't seen a perspective as good as yours. You ever considered becoming a writer? And Izuku's like, nah, just, I guess I'll just leave that up to Xehther. But he doesn't really write his stories. He just kind of comes up with them off the top of his head. And the guy's like, oh, well, I didn't ask, but okay. And from here, Izuku just pretty much finds himself back at home about a day later. Then gets an email notifying him that school will not be going on for a week, considering the events of the USJ just went down. Now, Izuku, once he sees that, he'd be like, okay, I mean, it makes sense that we're not going to be going to school, but it's like, what do I do? And he continues. He's like, all right, if I can just keep working on the Rasengan, I'll probably be fine. And so that's all Izuku does. He works on the Rasengan, and he works on more different jutsus that he can add to his arsenal so that someday he could be very, very versatile. And Izuku starts thinking to himself that maybe that isn't just the only exception to the rule that he had, right? Because in like, now that he's getting older, he's starting to see different visions of a boy named Naruto and some sort of war. It's strange. It was almost as if this strange being like declared war on everything, and he saw a powerful jutsu being used that looked like the Rasengan, but a more powerful version of it. And Izuku wonders to himself how in the world that was achieved. But seeing as he can't really do that himself right now, he's like, I'm just gonna put it on the back burner. I'll think about it later, and I'll continue living on with my normal life for now. And that's pretty much all Izuku does. He just continues living life, and bro is just straight vibing and chilling. Eventually, the 1 week would finally end, and he would find himself back at school, where he would look at Katsumi and think to himself, damn, really hope she notices me someday. As from here, we have Uraraka walking in the classroom being like, are you ready? And Izuku would just be thinking to himself, that's funny. It almost reminds me of that one clip, that one that goes, are you not entertained? You know what I mean? And Izuku just smirks as, from here, Uraraka walks over to him and she's like, are you excited? And Izuku's like, yeah, I'm excited. And, she walks over to everybody. And after this, everybody would finally be ready to get out of the classroom, right? But as they're all getting ready to leave, the entirety of all of the other classes would be right at their doorstep trying to, scope out the competition. Now, Izuku looking at this would be like, I'm not going to deal with this. And just flying Raijin straight to one of his markers that he would left in the house, right? Because he was not trying to waste time. He was just trying to get home and pass out. Because Izuku had a rough day. I mean, the dude ended up being on the back end of a couple of, not so good attacks, considering that they were training how to tank attacks. So they had to actually get tagged by attacks from their classmates. And let me just tell you, getting hit by attacks on purpose, not so fun. Durability training, not so fun. But Izuku ultimately took it like a champ, right? Because bro is not no B word, obviously, right? And so Izuku was able to casually go through his stuff and, do whatever it is that he needed to do, right? But pretty much what this ends up bringing us to, and the next point that I'm going to be getting to, is just that Izuku would actually go on to pretty much find himself in the UA Sports Festival, right? Now, at the UA Sports Festival, this is where things kind of begin to get a little bit interesting, right? Because Izuku this time around is actually going to be the one to give the speech. And when he would be told, he'd be like, okay, speech, I'm not too good at this. And finally, the day of the speech would come, and Izuku would just be looking around at all the crowd and think to himself, this is kind of similar to when I was the Hokage. And from here, Izuku thinks, when those dreams, right? And Izuku's just like, if he was able to do it, why can't I, right? As from here, Izuku just pretty much starts doing what you guys would expect Izuku to do. The dude literally just starts, he starts walking up, and then he's like, hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? As he starts getting the crowd pumped up, and he's like, are you guys ready for another year of entertaining UA Sports Festival? As the crowd just goes, they're all really excited, and Izuku's like, great. But before we get started, I quickly just want to say congratulations to every single person that made it out to this event. I know that it took you guys a lot of time to get the money to be here, so we're gonna make sure we put on a show for you guys and keep you guys entertained. What was that one clip? Right. Are you not entertained? We're gonna have you guys feeling like that all night, as all of the people in the stands would be like cheering, and they'd be like, wow, I really like that kid. He's really charismatic. And Izuku from here, he puts the mic down, and then he walks over towards the direction of the class where Katsumi would say, if that was me up there, I would have just declared myself the winner and then proceeded to win just to prove to everybody that I'm the best. But, I guess I won't get the chance right now. But next year for sure, I'll definitely be the one who wipes the floor with everybody. Right now, I'm not sure I can handle you, but I'll damn sure give it my best. As from here, Izuku says, well, go for it. As immediately, they would find themselves on the starting lineup of the, race. And once the race starts, Izuku's like, child's play. Now, they don't call this man the Yellow Flash for no reason, right? So Izuku would proceed to essentially, as soon as everything starts, grab his kunais and just yeet. He throws the kunais as far as possible, right? And the kunais, they end up going very, very far. He catches it, throws it again, teleports, catches and throws it again, catches and throws it again, catches and throws it again, right? And he pretty much ends up throwing it so far to the point where he gets to the finish line in about 5 seconds. And everybody is just like, what? Like, that is literally the record. Not even All Might was able to break that record back when he was a pro hero in training. So everybody just starts going absolutely crazy, and then eventually everybody else would finish in their respective places. Todoroki second, Katsumi third. Now, why is Katsumi a little bit weaker than how Bakugo would be? Because she's a girl. Yeah. And I doubt that body will be able to hold up with Explosion Quirk as good. Just like maybe like 3% worse. So, you know, that's what pretty much ends up leading Bakugo, or Katsumi, sorry, to not be the one who beats Todoroki, right? But what pretty much ends up happening after this is they would pretty much all be told to get into teams. Now, this time around, interestingly enough, Izuku walks over to Katsumi and would ask her to be on a team. And Katsumi says, nah, I don't need you to be on my team. I need to make sure that I get in with my own strength. And so she goes over to other people, gets her own team assembled, and Izuku ultimately has to pretty much just oh my god, my brain. It's like he has to just deal with the team that he gets in the original, which is Tokiyami, Uraraka, and Mei Hatsume, right? Now, ultimately, they do end up continuing to pass just because Izuku has the ability to create a mud dome around them, which would pretty much render almost everybody, you know, incapable of actually harming him. And the big hitters such as Todoroki and stuff like that would definitely try to get the bell, but not immediately at the beginning. So it would give Deku a little bit of a grace period until finally Todoroki rushes in, and so does Katsumi, attempting to take the headband. And Izuku just thinks to himself that the best course of action would probably just be to let one of them have it and go after the other people, right? So what does Izuku do? Izuku proceeds to essentially just be like, take it. And he throws the 1,000,000-point headband up in the air where, you know, Katsumi and Todoroki both look at it. They rush at it and they begin facing each other off just to get this headband, right? And as they're doing that, Izuku would blitz over towards the other contestants, snatching all of their headbands, meaning that only the people on Bakugo's team, Katsumi's team, and, you know, Todoroki's team and Deku's team win, because Deku literally snatches every other headband, meaning Shinso, he doesn't even end up passing on to the next portion. And what ends up happening is a very, very strange battle royale where we only really have 12 participants, because 3 times 4 is 12. So yeah, they only have like 12 participants. So they're going to be a lot shorter battles, and we're not going to actually have to bear witness to as many battles as we would in the original. The first battle, though, is going to be Deku versus Todoroki. Considering he doesn't have to face off against Shino, I figured I would give you guys a little bit of a more special fight early on, just to kind of power scale Deku and show you guys just how far along he is compared to his classmates. Now, what ended up happening is essentially Deku and Todoroki would both get in the ring, right? Now they're both facing off each other, and Todoroki's like, I'm gonna show everybody here why I'm stronger, why I'm better. And from here, Izuku goes, try it. As from here, you know, Endeavor's like, Shoto, you know, from the crowd, and he's like really trying to pump his son up, but Todoroki just doesn't care. And Izuku from here looks at the direction of Todoroki as the match starts, and Izuku would place Todoroki under a very, very subtle genjutsu. Now, what does this genjutsu do to Todoroki? It makes Todoroki's distance perception get messed up. So while Todoroki might shoot an ice geyser, and he thinks that Izuku is closer than he seems, he would actually be a lot farther, right? So he would do that to Todoroki to mess up his perception, right? And this would lead Todoroki to not be able to land his first attack, which would give Izuku just enough time to toss a flying Raijin kunai at the direction of Todoroki. And as soon as Todoroki sees that, he tries to freeze the kunai mid-air so that Izuku can't pretty much teleport to it, or else he would be stuck in a block of ice, right? But Izuku is like, nah, I'm not gonna let you just like stop me right there. Like, that's not happening. So Izuku pretty much gets in the way, and he's like, I got this. And he would throw a bunch of kunai so that Todoroki can't possibly stop it. Throws them straight up into the air, and Izuku would pretty much go on to like just let them all fall onto the ground, as Todoroki thinks to himself, which one do I like attack, right? And Izuku smirks as he teleports to one, and Todoroki's just like, there, as suddenly Deku teleports to another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, ultimately closing the distance until Izuku says, water style, water flood barrage, as bam, a massive amount of water would just shoot out from the lips of Deku as it just bam splashes at Todoroki and sends the man almost flying off the arena, were it not for the fact that Todoroki would freeze the water and create a barrier that would stop him from exiting the arena. But right as he would stop and begin to gain his bearings, Izuku grabs a Rasengan and bam, straight to Todoroki's gut, sending him flying through the ice and sending him crashing straight onto the ground to give Todoroki that juicy fat L, right? Following this, we would end up having the battles between Bakugo and, you know, his adversary, which I'm going to be saying is going to be, I'm not sure, but you know, he fights whoever it is that was on Todoroki's team. But point blank being that the final round would pretty much consist of Izuku versus Katsumi, right? Now, the way that this battle would actually end up going down is Katsumi, you know, she's like, don't take it easy on me, right? And you know, Izuku is not somebody who's gonna like take it easy on someone just because it's a girl, right? He was gonna take it easy just because he liked her, but the fact is that he knows that Katsumi would not like that, right? Like, if you ask somebody to give you their best and they do everything except for that, I'm pretty sure you're gonna most likely feel hurt. Like if you're in the middle of something that you're passionate about and somebody like gives you 50% and they still beat you, I feel like that's kind of a smack to your face. You know what I mean? It's better to be utterly defeated than to be defeated and know that you could have been defeated even much worse, right? But basically what ends up happening is Todoroki just has to watch from the stands as Katsumi and Deku pretty much start the battle off, right? And as soon as it starts, Katsumi would blast up into the air so that Izuku can't pretty much just teleport up there immediately, right? But what Katsumi wasn't expecting was for Izuku to appear right behind her as she was mid-air, and Izuku to pretty much end up grappling Katsumi mid-air and pretty much using a hidden lotus straight to smash her into the ground and lead Katsumi to get knocked out point blank by Izuku, who would have landed a mean attack. Let me tell you, that attack was mean. It was a monstrous attack, right? But Katsumi gets absolutely knocked out, and Izuku would be declared the winner of the sports festival, as everybody just had to watch as this like walking prodigy just pretty much wiped the floor with everybody. Following this, we would have a celebratory ceremony, and once that would be done, we would end up pretty much catching in to just have to watch as what's it called? What's the word I'm looking for? We would just have to watch as... What am I even thinking of? Oh yeah, right. As Izuku returns back to class and he's pretty much informed about the fact that they're all going to be needing to pick their, well, hero names. You know, they're all going to have to pick their hero names at some point, and it's about time that they finally get to do that very, very much so important thing that is picking their hero names. Izuku would go with the name The Yellow Flash, and he thinks that it actually suits him a lot considering his hair, and all you really see is a yellow flash. Allow me for a second to go turn off my AC before it becomes a problem, because I'm pretty sure that you guys might have actually heard when it goes out of control. You know, every now and then, like it'll start like shaking like rapidly for some reason. I don't know if that's a bad thing. Actually, you know what? I'm not even gonna do it. I could not be bothered to stand up right now. I'm too comfortable. But you know, what pretty much ends up happening is Izuku picks his hero name, and after this, he would be told to pick who he wants to intern with, right? And because of this timeline and the way that Izuku fights, I think that it would actually be a really cool addition if we were to have Aizawa actually submit an application to Izuku, telling him that he would be willing to train him, right? And so Izuku would actually end up getting to train alongside Aizawa, who would teach him the methods of using the scarf technique, right? And Izuku, just being the absolute prodigy that he is, would be able to pick up the technique rapidly. And let me tell you, like, seriously, so rapidly. It's not even funny how fast Izuku was able to learn it, right? But what ultimately ends up happening is that Izuku would find himself back in the class after their little what's the word I'm looking for? Excavation, like little 1 week training, right thing. And you know, once they do come back, I do want to emphasize one thing though, ladies and gentlemen, before I continue, is that once they do come back, what would end up actually happening that is a little bit different is going to be the fact that what's it called? Okay, I should not have done that. But anyways, what would end up happening is pretty much that Izuku would find himself in a position where, you know, he is pretty much getting ready to do the race. And before I forget, ladies and gentlemen, let me just preface this by saying that no, there will not be a stain arc. Now, let me repeat that for those people in the back that didn't hear me. There will not be a stain arc. And you guys might be like, why? Like, what are you doing, Xehther? Why is there no stain arc? Well, to put it lightly, guys, Izuku's not really friends with Ida. So when it comes to Ida rushing over there and trying to fight Stain and all that stuff, Deku is not going to be over there since he's with Aizawa. And considering that he's not his friend, he doesn't have a tag placed on him. And Ida just so happens to be one of those, like, you know, one of those little mishaps that Minato had in the future, right? You guys remember when Obito got crushed by rocks and, you know, he kind of like died. Well, just imagine that, but Ida, because yeah, Ida dies. Like, if you're gonna go after somebody who's literally called the hero killer, you kind of had it coming after you. You kind of had it coming, buddy. Like, that's just natural selection at that point. Like, I'm sorry, but Ida, you're dead, right? And because of this, what would actually end up happening is the students would actually get about 2 weeks worth off of school. Now, why do they get 2 weeks off of school? Just due to the fact that, someone just died, so UA has to be shut down for about 2 months. But ultimately, they get reinstated. 2 students don't end up coming back, which is Coda and Invisible Girl, just because they don't either they don't bring anything new to the story that we haven't seen already. So there's really no point in having those 2 characters present at all. So I'm just gonna be saying that because those 2 characters are pretty much taken out of the story at this point, nothing at all changes. But Izuku does find himself in the race, trying to show his progression, and because he is called the Yellow Flash, he completes it in record timing, finding All Might almost immediately, right? And once that happens, what would pretty much end up happening after that is essentially all of the students would be informed about the fact that they're going to be having the Forest Training Camp arc. Now, when all of them are informed about the Forest Training Camp arc, they would all get pretty excited, and all as a group would end up actually going off to the mall. This is where Izuku's finally going to be getting some alone time with a little certain someone, right? And Izuku looks to Katsumi right as all of them split up, and he's like, hey, mind if I tag along with you? And Katsumi, she's just like, yeah, but make sure you stay out of my way, right? And from here, they start walking, but it's at this moment that some random somebody would appear and hold onto Katsumi straight by the neck. Now, this person would be Shigaraki, and he would say, make one wrong move, and I make her disappear. And Izuku's just like, okay. They're kind of like at a standstill, where Shigaraki just has this twisted like smile on his face, and he's like, do something, hero, if you really want to cause mass destruction everywhere and you want another one of those little UA incidents mishaps happening. If not, I'm gonna need you to sit down and talk. As from here, Izuku goes on to look at Stain and say, Shigaraki, and say, look, just put her down, we'll talk. And Shigaraki, he goes over to sit down, and they pretty much get into a situation where they begin talking. However, as all of this is happening, Izuku would be meticulously planning what his next move is going to be and how to save Katsumi. And the first thing that would come to his mind would be the fact that Izuku is most likely going to have to get rid of Shigaraki. And so what does Izuku do? Well, Izuku has not really too many good choices, because there's not a lot of ways that he's going to be able to free her. But it's at this moment that, the police officer would actually walk over and Shigaraki would be forced to let go, right? Because he doesn't want to seem suspicious or anything. And so Izuku would kind of just have like a little bit of a moment where he just thanks himself for the fact that he didn't have to cause a huge scene at the mall. From here, Katsumi looks at Izuku, and she's like, you were really ready to risk it all for me, weren't you? And Izuku says, honestly, had that police officer not showed up, I was gonna have to take him out of commission for good. And Katsumi says, you were gonna do that for me? As Izuku says, I do a lot of things for you, Katsumi.
As anime fans, we love to show our support to our favorite shows by rocking anime apparel. But something I'm pretty sure we can all agree on is it's so expensive. So I've partnered up with Fandom to bring you all affordable, high quality anime merch that you are sure to love. And if you use my code Xehther at checkout, you can even get an extra 10% off the already affordable merch. Keep in mind, it does come from overseas sellers, so its sizing is going to be different since it's overseas. That said, let's get back into the video.
We pick up our story in the perspective of Deku and Katsumi. Now, both of them would have just decided that, it's not really worth taking all of this stuff to the police. So they don't. They pretty much just continue going around shopping, and what ends up happening from here is they get themselves mosquito repellent spray, and then 5 seconds later, they find themselves at Cinnabon. Now, Izuku would ask her if she wants to go get a bite to eat, and she's like, sure thing. And from here, Izuku and Katsumi, they start getting their little food on, and they start eating and talking and stuff. And Izuku, my man starts using his unspoken riz and just starts risen her up, right? You know, he starts talking his game. And you know, Katsumi, she's like, oh, like okay, you know, she's effing with the kid, you know what I'm saying? And Izuku is just doing his thing, you know what I mean? Like he's getting closer and closer and closer. And it would be at this moment that, you know, both of them would be getting like really happy with each other and stuff like that. When Mineta and Kaminari would come barging in and be like, oh my god, I knew it. As from, I don't know why I even made that voice. I was trying to do Mineta, but it didn't sound like Mineta at all. But no, you know, Kaminari and Mineta would both be like, I knew it. And from here, you know, Izuku and Katsumi would look at them, as Katsumi would say, you guys mind? Like a little bit of privacy would be cool. And then Kaminari would be like, but aren't we at the mall? And Katsumi is like, you heard what I said, blasting an explosion off in her hand, as Izuku is just like, yeah, guys, could you guys please get out of here? And from here, you know, Kaminari and Mineta go off as Izuku and Katsumi continue off their day. But now it's kind of awkward seeing as, you know, they were both told exactly what it looked like they were doing. And Katsumi would kind of just be a little shy with a little bit of a blush on her face, as eventually another hour would pass and, you know, they find themselves back with the group. Once this happens, they all end up going their separate ways, and eventually they would all meet up once again in a week when they have to ultimately get on the bus for the forest training arc, right? Now, they found themselves in the bus, and when they're there, they're pretty much just playing road games. You know, they're playing Truth or Dare, they're playing, you know, Two Truths, One Lie, and they're just doing that like little funny stuff, right? Just to pass the time, you know, get to know each other, talk amongst each other, and just ultimately just have a cool environment. Like everything is just perfect. Like nothing at all is just out of place, and everything is just going by so smoothly, right? And so what pretty much ends up happening is eventually they make it to the mountaintop of some random cliff with some sort of bar that's railing that's over it, right? That's not letting people fall. And it would be here that all of them are like, so is this where we're gonna train? Like just the forest? And as I was like, nah, training grounds is actually about 3 hours away. You can see it from here. And then he's like, and then it would be at this moment that all of the students realize exactly what's going on. They're like, no, let's get back on the bus, right? And Aizawa was like, no. As he proceeds to cancel all of their quirks, yep, all of them. And you know, one of the wild pussycats would actually end up using her ability to actually throw them off of the cliff and lead all of the students to actually fall on the ground. And you know, they have to get up and, you know, undust themselves, and they're all like, why do we have to do this? And Izuku's like, think about it as training. That's exactly what we're here to do, and we got to get this done. So let's start making our way there. And the hero Mandalay would come down and be like, hey guys, just keep in mind, there's actually going to be forest beasts you guys are going to have to face off with. Can't make it too easy, right? And from here, you know, all the characters that are on the weaker side would be like, no, you know what I mean? But ultimately they all have to make their way to the forest camp, and they would eventually get there, right? And once they do, I wish I could say that Deku gets punched in the nuts this time, but he doesn't. He looks at Koda and he's like, okay, I probably shouldn't talk to him, and he just doesn't. So from here, somebody else is the one who does it. And I'd like to think it would probably be Kaminari, who'd go up to him and be like, what's up, bud? And you know, Koda just straight yoink, just straight to the nuts. And Izuku would just think to himself, oh, I'm sure glad it wasn't me, right? And you know, after this would happen, what would pretty much end up going down is all of them would just have to, you know, get there and have a delicious grubbing session, right? Because you know, the wild cats actually ended up cooking for them, right? And so they all enjoy their food. And what would pretty much end up happening after this is that they would have about 3 days following this of just consistent good training. Eventually on the second day, class 1B would have actually ended up arriving, and they would actually end up learning that they're going to be sharing the camp. Not only that, but the people who actually failed the final exam test are going to be, you know, in the remedial course arc. And right here is where you guys are like, okay, Xehther, why didn't you cover the final battle? Like, what's up with that? Like, Xehther, like, you literally skipped it. Like, you just brought that up. Well, yeah, but let me just tell you guys why I skipped it. Number one, you guys probably don't care about studies, right? You guys don't care about, you know, whether Deku passes the test. And when it comes to the portion where they have to escape, Izuku is kind of a teleporter. So it's like, he kind of wins off rip, you know what I mean? Like, if he crosses the finish line by himself, he wins. So Izuku wins, right? So there's really no real reason for me to cover that, because even if he was to fight All Might or Aizawa can't exactly cancel his quirk, and All Might can't catch up to him before he teleports out, right? So what would pretty much end up happening is that's it. He just passes, and whoever's on his team ends up passing as well. the person that they would actually make Deku work alongside with would actually be Katsumi. And I think it's pretty interesting how they make them work together. You know, the rest of the classes are like, ooh, Katsumi and Deku. And, you know, Katsumi, she's like, I'll kill ya. All right. But regardless, though, they do pretty much find themselves in the training grounds. And one thing would lead to another when finally, you know, they would be on their 4th day, right? On their 4th day, it would be about nighttime and everybody's just having a good time. You know, they're cooking, they're having, you know, fun amongst each other. And eventually Koda notices that, Izuku notices that Koda just completely walked off. Izuku goes after him and he's like, why did he leave? And Katsumi, noticing this, would actually end up following Deku, right? Deku just watches as Koda sits down and, you know, he thinks to himself that, you know, he lost his parents, right? From here, Izuku gets right over there with his plate of curry and he's like, you okay? And Koda just turns back and he's like, get lost. I came here to be alone. As Izuku says, yeah, kid, I get that. You know, I kind of saw you walk away, but kid like you shouldn't be alone out here in the forest. It's dangerous. And Koda would say, what do you know about dangerous? More dangerous it is to be a hero than to be out here where nobody else is. And Izuku says, look, kid, I get it, but you know, somebody has to make sure that you're okay. And Koda's like, yeah, well, my parents should be the one to do that, but look at where we are. And, you know, from here, after that, those words leave Koda's mouth, he just kind of starts bawling up. And Izuku sits right next to him and says, where are your parents, Koda? And Koda says, they're dead. They died trying to be heroes. And from here, Izuku looks at Koda and says, well, I can't say I understand what it feels like to lose your parents. I do understand what it feels like to have no parents. And Izuku looks to Koda and says, Koda, I'm an orphan. And just because I didn't have my parents, that didn't make me any lesser than anybody else. That didn't make me any better than anybody else either. I just had to make do with what I had. Eventually, I was adopted by a man named Sajima who taught me all I know. And, you know, now I'm here trying to become a hero, trying to show that I can be the best version of me. If your parents died trying to become heroes, why don't you take on the mantle of doing that yourself? You could be the one in your family to truly become a pro hero. And Koda says, no, they were pro heroes. And then Koda's like, they were pro heroes. They were the water hose heroes. And Izuku's like, the water hose heroes? Well, that's a name I haven't heard in ages. And Izuku goes on to look at Koda and be like, okay, well, how about this, Koda? You might not be, you know, the only hero in your family, but your legacy, their legacy, will live on through you. You can be the hero that they always wanted to be. I can tell, Koda, you can do it. And Koda just looks at him and he's like, really? And from here, you know, you hear a deep raspy voice go, looks like I got lucky tonight. I found 2 pieces of meat to kill. And, you know, Koda just looks up as he's like, it's him. And Izuku looks over to see Muscular as Koda says, you're the guy that killed my... And Izuku immediately realizes what that meant. Like, this is the guy that killed Koda's parents. You know, the guy that took what Izuku wished he could have had growing up away from him. And Izuku, once he hears that this guy was responsible for that, let me tell you, Izuku was not playing no more games. Izuku was on demon time. And what did Izuku proceed to do after this? Izuku goes on to be like, hey, Koda, go over there with Katsumi, why don't you? I'll take care of the big bad. And Koda's like, no, you'll die. And Izuku's like, Koda, look at me. I got this. As from here, you know, Koda looks at, you know, Izuku's eyes and there's not a hint of fear in them. There's not a hint of like, get out of here before you die. It's just go over there and relax. You know what I mean? And Izuku proceeds to just stare down Muscular as he says to him, you think it's funny to be the reason that a kid has to grow up without his parents? You know how hard it is to live every day wishing you had a mom or a dad by your side? Well, I'm gonna make you wish that you were never born, since you'll never know what that feels like. As from here, Muscular laughs and goes, you can try, kid. As he gigantifies himself, right? He becomes large. And Izuku looks at the direction of Muscular and says, all right, let's do this. As from here, he lunges at Muscular with the kunai, mind you, and proceeds to essentially just blitz behind Muscular in a fashion that Muscular couldn't react to. And then from here, Izuku goes on to smash a Rasengan into his muscles. But because the muscles are just so dense and compact and like they're so together, Izuku's Rasengan does hurt Muscular, but it doesn't do the effect that Izuku was looking for, and he realizes that's not enough damage. From here, Izuku gets punched away, and one of his arms is quite literally broken at that point, right? And you know, like his like forearm pretty much got shattered by the punch, right? And Izuku would land, you know, kind of like irk in pain, and then say, that hurt. As from here, you know, Izuku thinks to himself that if the Rasengan won't work, then this other move might. As from here, he thinks back to that jutsu that's like sort of a lightning style thing, right? And Izuku just thinks to himself, it's now or never, as he weaves a couple of hand signs and says, Chidori! And rushes straight at the direction of Muscular, right? And from here, he pierces Muscular straight through the stomach, because the Rasengan and the Chidori are two very different things. The Chidori can pierce, while the Rasengan can kind of like hit, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like a blunt thing that can like very much so damage somebody, but it's not going to exactly pierce them, if that makes sense, right? But Izuku does this, and once this is all said and done, Izuku would look to the direction of Muscular, who would have been easily taken down by that you know, offensive move, and he would just fall to the ground as, you know, he just dies. Following this, Izuku takes Koda to Aizawa, and what would happen after this is Izuku goes to the teleport markers of all of his other classmates to pretty much try to make sure that they're all safe, right? And because he's able to do this, he finds the situation between Tokiyami and Shoji going down, and Izuku would be able to quickly weave fire style hand signs to cause Tokiyami to gain control over his quirk once more, teleporting over towards the direction of Uraraka and, you know, Toga. Uraraka, Toga, and Tsuyu, and once he's there, he would easily be able to handle Toga, leading him to pretty much teleport over to the direction of Bakugo, of Katsumi, sorry, and Todoroki, who would both have been trying to face off against a man called Moonfish. Now, they would have just defeated him, and once that happens, Izuku would pretty much just like grab all of them and teleport them right back to the main area, right? And it's at this moment that, you know, the guy who pretty much you know, ends up pretty much capturing Katsumi, our Bakugo in the original, as well as Tokiyami, would not be able to, because Izuku teleported them away instead of having them walk, with Katsumi being at the end, right? And so pretty much because of this, what ends up happening now is that since they're all with the heroes, the guy, Mr. Compressor, wouldn't actually have the opportunity to sneak up on them and try to capture him that way. So they have to manually try to capture Katsumi as well as Tokiyami, who was also on the target list, right? And because of this, a certain somebody would realize that they have not reported back from the mission. This would lead All For One to actually end up arriving on the scene, and once he sees that most of his actual men have been taken care of, meaning like Moonfish, Toga was taken out of commission, Spinner was taken out of commission, Magma was taken out of commission, and Muscular was taken out of commission, you know, he's not very happy, because the Vanguard Action Squad ended up failing a lot harder than they did in the original this time around. And because of that, All For One congratulates all of the heroes, telling them they did a mighty bang up job. And from here, he would proceed to look at the direction of Katsumi as he says, "You'll be coming with me," and looks to Tokiyami and says, "That quirk of yours is truly phenomenal. I can't wait to get my hands on it." As from here, Katsumi and Tokiyami both look at All For One, and Izuku, realizing that All For One is here for Katsumi, would just say, "All right, guys, stand behind me." As from here, everybody looks at him and they're like, "Izuku, you have a broken arm. What are you gonna do?" And Izuku says, "Only thing I can do," as he weaves one hand signs, and he would shoot a devastating water attack at the direction of All For One, which he would block by simply placing a force field in front of him, as all the water just shoots past him and doesn't do any damage whatsoever. Izuku from here goes on to pretty much shoot an earth style attack at All For One, which he would just fly over so it couldn't even attack him, and Izuku would then realize that this is going to be a lot harder than he thought. So Izuku would use in tandem fire and water to create a large amount of smoke, and with that, Izuku would throw tons of kunais at the direction of All For One, right? Now, All For One, not knowing that these kunais were meant to hit him and seeing that all of them were just scattering, would laugh, saying, "You missed." As, you know, Izuku says, "Did I?" As he grabs one of the kunais, and All For One is just stunned. He's like, "What?" As Izuku turns to the direction of All For One and just straight dead. Like, All For One is straight dead. Like, that's as easy as I can put it for you guys. All for One literally gets killed by Izuku. And you guys might be like, dude, like that was the most anticlimactic fight ever. But you guys have to remember that Minato is not one to play around and try to drag out battles. This is not Dragon Ball Z. This is Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash, the dude that killed 1,000 ninjas so fast that none of them could even realize what had happened. So yes, I do think that Izuku this time around would be able to kill All for One if he has the power of, you know, misdirection, and the power of what's it called, the power of surprise, the power of what's it called, the power of the surprise, I have the power of why is this so hard for me to think of stuff sometimes? I don't know. But anyways, after this, the cleanup would begin, and Aizawa would actually be the one who ends up pretty much hiding the situation with All for One. Like, the entire media would hide the situation between All for One and Izuku, because if word came out that Izuku actually killed a villain, like regardless of who the villain was, Izuku would get extreme backlash and would not be allowed to continue in the hero course. So they cover it up, and Izuku would actually be thanked by All Might, who would congratulate him heavily and would tell Izuku that, you know, he is very much so gonna be a future #1 hero someday, telling Izuku that not even he was capable of defeating him back in his heyday. And Izuku says, you could have, All Might, but you just lack the instinct of wanting to get things done fast enough, right? And you know, from here, he pretty much goes to take the provisional hero license, and all the students would just find themselves in the room when Mirio, what's it called, Tamaki and Nejire would end up introducing themselves as the big three of UA. They proceed to pretty much take them outside, and Mirio would challenge the entirety of Class 1A, as, you know, he's all like, yeah, I'm Mirio. And, you know, he challenges them, and he's all like, so, you guys liking UA? And, you know, he pretty much just shows them that he's a lot stronger than they think. And just saying, the only one that didn't pass this time around for the provisional license would have actually been Todoroki. Considering that Katsumi's a girl, I think that she would actually, just because she's a girl, be allowed a little bit more leniency in the test, and would actually barely scrape by, right? And the reason that she barely scrapes by is just because of how rude she was to all the people that she would rescue, all the fake rescuees. And, you know, I think that that's just a pretty funny gag to play with for the situation that we're going for, right? But pretty much what ends up happening from here is we would actually have Mirio facing off against the classroom, as the dude proceeds to humble each and every single one of them, and they all get beat except for Izuku, who still hasn't gotten tagged by Mirio. Now Mirio would attempt the strategy of trying to poke his eyes, but Izuku is more than smart enough to realize that that's nothing but a diversion, right? So he would be able to easily dodge out of the way, and Mirio would not end up actually hitting anything, and Mirio would be like, what? As from here, Izuku would be able to rush in and actually, you know, tag Mirio, or so he thinks, because Mirio would be able to teleport, right? Or phase. And Izuku just thinks to himself, okay, how about I try that technique, right? And because Mirio has never seen Izuku fight or anything like that, he just knows that he is like a teleporter and something like that. Izuku throws the kunai straight through the head of Mirio, and literally in a scene identical to the one that we got between Minato and Obito, Izuku lands a Rasengan point blank on Mirio, winning the battle. And after the battle would be all said and done, Mirio would enthusiastically welcome Izuku to his agency. Izuku does end up accepting, and from here, bro literally just goes to intern with Tsunade, right? And Mirio, keep in mind, this time he has one for all, so Izuku being able to defeat him was not a joke, because Mirio wasn't like, it's not like he was using 100% or anything like that, or even 50, which is what he's capable of, but Mirio was using 20% one for all speed, and Izuku was still capable of defeating him with that, you know what I mean? In tandem with his phasing quirk, that now instead of having to phase through the ground, he can just phase without sinking or having to hold his breath, right? Because of one for all's impact on his quirk. It would turn it to somewhat of what Kamui is, where not necessarily giving him another dimension, but it does give him the ability to actually just phase, right? And because of this, we end up getting this situation between, you know, Tsunade pretty much telling Izuku that, you know, he's proud to have him in his agency, and eventually Izuku and Mirio find themselves facing off against Overhaul in the alleyway. Now, in the original, Mirio was not strong enough to handle Overhaul at this point, but if Mirio, I'm being very honest here, if Mirio truly wanted to this time around, he could slap Overhaul up by himself. So the final battle that you guys were expecting is actually going to be so anticlimactic, because Mirio was just like, okay, Izuku, you mind holding the girl? And you know, from here, he pretty much activates 50% and bam! Straight to Overhaul's face, like so fast that Overhaul couldn't even react. And because Overhaul can't even touch him to use his quirk, he wasn't even capable of dismembering Mirio or winning or anything like that. And so the heroes win. GG. That's pretty much the end of What If Deku is Minatos Reincarnation. Actually, no, it's not. I forgot to mention, Izuku does eventually end up with Katsumi, and they have a son by the name of Naruto.